Mindfulness has become such a popular and well-known term that almost everyone I meet with these days has already heard of it. Mindfulness can be quite a helpful mental health practice, but some feel reluctant, even skeptical towards it, perhaps imagining that it requires meditation poses, or changing your politics, or worst of all, yoga pants. Join the Rolling Therapist to learn why mindfulness can be practiced anywhere, like riding a motorcycle, by anyone. No yoga pants required. It's January. I miss riding. When I first started learning about various practices that are now called mindfulness, they didn't have a name. They were strange and somewhat dubious activities which the mainstream tended to view askance. Now, mindfulness is mainstream. Well, sort of. It still has a bit of a stereotypical flavor to it, evoking images of wellness seekers who practice it in the morning after drinking a green-colored smoothie and before slipping into some Birkenstocks, stopping at Starbucks, and then heading to yoga class. I'm about as flexible as a 2x4. While I think mindfulness is helpful, I don't do yoga. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying yoga is bad. There's quite a pile of research indicating it's quite good for both mental and physical health. I recommend it to people who find it appealing. I'm also not rejecting things like California, vegetarianism, incense, the lotus position, peace, love, or comfortable footwear. It's just that the Rolling Therapist would like to make it clear that mindfulness does not actually require any of those things. You can do mindfulness while taking out the trash, using a chainsaw, eating a hamburger, or best of all, riding a motorcycle. Mindfulness is, not surprisingly, about being mindful, which dictionary.com defines as attentive or aware of. And there you have the first and most basic building block of mindfulness, noticing stuff and paying attention to it. Not just any stuff. Most definitely not your phone. Mindfulness is all about focusing on the stuff contained within the boundaries of you. Your thoughts, your emotions, your actions, and the many sensations which pop up in various parts of the body as we move through our day and do whatever we do. You might be thinking, I kind of already do that. After all, I'm the one living in this body. Very true. But how much do you pay attention to everything going on inside you? I mean, really pay attention to it. Like you're studying it. How often do you step back and think about your thoughts? I'm having a worried thought. When you feel feelings, do you pay attention to them? I notice a tightness in my throat, and it's like a heavy blanket is weighing me down. Mindfulness is not just self-awareness. It's much more active and focused. I can be aware of various patterns of thought and feeling and pay little attention to them. Mindfulness shines a spotlight on these thoughts and feelings when they happen and pays very close attention to them, noticing as much detail as possible. Dialectical behavior therapy, there's a mouthful, teaches mindfulness as the core, foundational skill upon which to build effective emotional regulation and productive interactions with other people. The ever-so-helpful DBT folks identify 3 basic areas of mindfulness skills: observe, describe, and participate. I've already been talking about observing. That's noticing stuff which happens inside yourself and really paying close attention to it. It is totally possible to watch your thoughts. Let's say I have the thought, I hate mosquitoes. There's a big difference between actively thinking that thought and stepping back to observe it. Hey, look at that. I just had a really intense thought. Which brings us to the second skill area of describing. I observed the thought about the mosquito and described it as an intense thought. Let's look at my ride for another example. When I hopped on the bike, the temperature was only a few degrees above freezing. For reasons that escape my meager scientific knowledge, when you're flying along in the open air, the temperature feels much colder than when you're standing still. The faster you go, the colder it gets. There's a link in the description to a Northwest Territories motorcycle group, veterans of cold riding, featuring a chart calculating this stuff. Based on that chart, at highway speed, my chilly ride felt like somewhere between -10 and -15 degrees Celsius. This gave me plenty of opportunity to observe feeling really, really cold. This is also a great opportunity to bring up another important mindfulness point. Two of them, actually. The nons. Non-judgment and non-attachment. In order to observe and describe your experiences in a mindful way, you need to do so without judgment. In other words, I hate the cold is not terribly mindful. It's obviously a judgment and shows that I'm attached to feeling a different way. That interferes with focus. I can't clearly study something when I'm dying to get away from it. No big deal. I can immediately turn that into a mindfulness opportunity by stepping back to observe and describe it. I'm having strong, hostile thoughts and feelings about feeling cold. Now I'm doing mindfulness. Sensations are excellent things to observe and describe. For example, at this point in the ride, my toes are like ice cubes. If I observe and describe the sensations of freezing toes, it might go like this. I notice a kind of tingling sensation. There's also a couple of different kinds of pain. A sharp, burning kind of pain, ironically, on the surface, and more of a dull, aching kind of pain deeper inside. It's almost like my toes are floating along in space because I can't feel the texture of my woolly socks anymore. Participation is the third area of skill. Observing and describing freezing toes demands quite a bit of this skill. It's tempting to either ignore them or grumble and feel annoyed by them. Both of these options avoid paying attention to how the toes feel. Participation means dive into it and let yourself fully feel whatever is going on. That's the only way to give it your full attention and describe all the bits and pieces of it. If you're wondering what possible benefit this might have for you, consider the difference between cruising along thinking about how much I hate freezing toes and desperately hoping for the ride to end, compared with riding along and noticing these sensations with curiosity and interest. With the first option, the ride will seem to take forever, and with the mindfulness approach, it'll be over before you know it. A couple more thoughts on the participation skill. Don't scroll Instagram while you're practicing mindfulness. Dividing your attention will sabotage the ability to observe and describe. Participation also refers to the need to practice. Noticing some tingles in your toes once or twice is not going to revolutionize your life. Here's where mindfulness often falls off the rails. If you try it a couple of times, that is not sufficient reason to make up your mind that mindfulness is a scam. That therapist lied to me. It doesn't work. Mindfulness is not a magic incantation which brings instant and lasting bliss. It's more of a stance to take while living life. Stance as in how you stand, with feet close together. If I take a different stance, like so, If you've ever watched wrestling or boxing, you'll know that the fighters don't stand with their feet close together. They take a stance which provides better stability when attacks come their way. Mindfulness is a bit like that, but in mental and emotional terms. And just as wrestlers and boxers don't need to wear yoga pants, neither does anyone making use of mindfulness. As I mentioned earlier, mindfulness can be done while eating a hamburger in a greasy diner. And if you do, observe and describe all of the tastes, smells, textures, colors, and even sounds involved in eating that burger. Notice what it feels like in your mouth as you swallow it and as it fills your belly. You see, mindfulness not only helps to keep us better grounded so that various thoughts and feelings don't knock us off balance as easily, but it allows us to experience life more richly. There's much more to be said about this mindfulness thing. However, the rolling therapist thinks it's best to start with the idea that anyone can do mindfulness, no matter your fashion choices, culture, subculture, politics, or preferred flavor of ice cream. In future videos, I'll get into more of the nuts and bolts of mindfulness practice. For now, I'm going to pay attention to low temperature sensations and the various thoughts and feelings which pop up as I finish my ride.